The train groaned to a halt beneath a sky the color of polished steel. Eleanor Hartley tightened her grip on the worn leather handle of her suitcase as she looked through the frosted window. The tiny station of Pine Ridge, Montana, was little more than a weathered platform surrounded by endless pine forests and distant snow-covered mountains. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, disappearing into the cold afternoon air. For a long moment, she simply sat there. This was supposed to be the beginning of a better life. 3 months earlier, she had been living in Boston, caring for her ailing father until illness finally claimed him. The small tailoring shop they owned had been sold to pay medical debts, leaving Eleanor with almost nothing except a few family keepsakes and enough money for a one-way train ticket west. When she answered a newspaper advertisement placed by rancher Samuel Whitaker, she hadn't been searching for romance. She had been searching for survival. Their letters had been practical rather than poetic. Samuel had written about his ranch, his horses, and the peaceful valley where he'd spent his entire life. He admitted he was lonely after years of living alone and wished to find a wife who valued honesty more than wealth. His words had never sounded exaggerated. They sounded real. More importantly, they sounded safe. For nearly 5 months they exchanged letters. Then came the final one. I'll meet the afternoon train on December 4th. You'll recognize me by my brown hat and old gray coat. Welcome home, Eleanor. She had read those words so many times that she could almost hear his voice. Now it was December 4th. The conductor opened the carriage door. Pine Ridge. Last stop. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped onto the wooden platform. The cold bit immediately through her gloves. She searched every face. A ranch hand loaded supplies. An elderly woman hugged her grandson. 2 merchants argued over crates. But there was no man wearing a gray coat. She waited. 5 minutes became 15, then 30. Passengers disappeared one by one until the station grew silent. The train whistle echoed across the valley before disappearing into mountains. As the last rail car vanished around the bend, Eleanor realized she was standing completely alone. She refused to panic. Perhaps Samuel had been delayed. A broken wagon. A sick horse. Unexpected weather. There had to be an explanation. She sat quietly on the wooden bench with her suitcase resting beside her. The winter sun slowly drifted toward the mountains. Cold wind swept through the empty station. Still no one came. Eventually, an elderly station master stepped outside, carrying a lantern. He studied her for several seconds. "Miss, are you waiting for someone?" "Yes." Eleanor answered with a hopeful smile. Samuel Whitaker. The old man's expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Not surprise. Something much heavier. "I'm afraid," he said quietly, removing his hat. "You haven't heard." Her heartbeat stopped. "Heard what?" The station master sighed deeply. "Samuel Whitaker passed away nearly 6 weeks ago." The words struck harder than any winter wind. "No." "I'm terribly sorry." She stared at him, unable to breathe. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't. He wrote me." "He probably did." She pulled the final letter from her coat pocket with trembling hands. "It says he would meet me today." The station master looked at the letter before lowering his eyes. "He caught pneumonia shortly after sending his last mail. We buried him before Thanksgiving." Silence filled the station. Everything she had planned, every dream, every mile she had traveled, vanished in a single sentence. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I'm sorry, miss." He genuinely meant it. "I truly am." Tears threatened, but Eleanor forced them back. She had cried enough over the past year. There were no tears left. "Is there a boarding house?" "There is." "I'll stay there tonight." He hesitated. "It isn't cheap." She nodded slowly. "I'll manage." Though in truth she knew she had enough money for perhaps 1 week. After that, nothing. The station master helped carry her suitcase into town. Pine Ridge was small. 1 general store, 1 blacksmith, a church, a saloon filled with loud laughter. and a modest boarding house owned by Mrs. Agnes Doyle, a kindly widow with silver hair and gentle eyes. Mrs. Doyle welcomed Eleanor without asking unnecessary questions. "You look exhausted, dear." "I am." "You'll eat first." "I couldn't possibly." "You'll eat," the older woman insisted kindly. For the first time in days, Eleanor enjoyed a hot meal. Fresh bread, beef stew, warm tea, simple things. Yet they almost brought her to tears. That night she sat alone beside the small bedroom window, staring at the moonlit mountains. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles, only to discover the man who promised her a future had died before she ever arrived. She had no family, no home, no work, no reason to remain in Montana. Yet she couldn't afford to leave. The next morning she visited every business in town searching for employment. The general store already had a clerk. The school had no openings. The church could offer only prayers. Even the hotel had recently hired a cook. By afternoon her hope was fading. As she walked back toward the boarding house, she noticed several townspeople gathered near the blacksmith. A large draft horse had thrown a shoe and refused to move. The blacksmith struggled to calm the frightened animal. Suddenly a deep, steady voice spoke from behind the crowd. "Give him room." Everyone stepped aside. A tall man walked forward wearing a dark wool coat dusted with snow. Unlike the others, he didn't shout. He didn't yank the horse's reins. Instead, he rested one weathered hand gently against the animal's neck. The frightened horse relaxed almost immediately. The man spoke softly. Within moments, the horse stood perfectly still. The blacksmith quickly replaced the shoe. The crowd murmured with admiration. Eleanor watched silently. There was something remarkably calm about him, strong without arrogance, confident without demanding attention. The blacksmith smiled. "Much obliged, Caleb." The man simply nodded. "No trouble." As he turned to leave, his eyes briefly met Eleanor's. He tipped his hat politely. Nothing more. No lingering glance. No unnecessary conversation. Just quiet respect. Mrs. Doyle noticed Eleanor watching him. "That's Caleb Lawson." "The rancher?" "The biggest cattle ranch outside Pine Ridge." "He seems—" She searched for the right word. "Different." Mrs. Doyle smiled. "He is." "What happened to his family?" Mrs. Doyle's expression softened. "His wife died 3 years ago during childbirth. The baby didn't survive either." Eleanor looked back toward the man walking his horse down the snowy street. He moved with the slow confidence of someone who had spent his life outdoors. There was loneliness about him. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly carried on broad shoulders. For the next several days, Eleanor continued searching for work. Nothing. Her savings shrank dangerously. On the 6th evening, Mrs. Doyle gently knocked on her bedroom door. "There's someone downstairs asking for you." For me? She couldn't imagine who. Descending the staircase, she found Caleb Lawson standing near the fireplace, hat in hand. He looked slightly uncomfortable, as though speaking to strangers wasn't something he often did. "Miss Hartley." "Mr. Lawson." Mrs. Doyle quietly disappeared into the kitchen, leaving them alone. Caleb cleared his throat. "Mrs. Doyle tells me you're looking for work." "I am." "I heard you kept books for your father's business." "Yes." "And handled customers." "I did." He nodded thoughtfully. "My foreman broke his leg last month." She waited. "I need someone to manage ranch records, supply orders, payroll, and correspondence until spring." Hope flickered inside her. It wouldn't be difficult. "I can do that." "You have a room at the ranch house." She blinked. "I don't expect anything improper," he added immediately. "The upstairs is 3 unused bedrooms. My housekeeper comes every morning. Several ranch hands live nearby. You'll be perfectly safe." His straightforward honesty made her feel strangely at ease. "I'd pay fair wages." She hesitated. "You don't even know me." "No." "Then why help?" Caleb looked toward the fire before answering. Because someone once helped me when I had nowhere else to go. Those simple words carried more weight than an elaborate speech ever could. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Eleanor smiled for what felt like the first time since arriving in Montana. "I accept." A faint smile appeared on Caleb's face. It transformed his otherwise serious features. "I thought you might." Outside, fresh snow began falling across Pine Ridge. Neither of them realized it then, but that quiet conversation inside Mrs. Doyle's boarding house marked the beginning of a journey neither had ever imagined. Sometimes life didn't end when plans fell apart. Sometimes it quietly began there. The following morning, Eleanor Hartley rode beside Caleb Lawson through the snow-covered valley toward his ranch. The journey was quiet. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation. Towering pine trees lined the narrow trail, while fresh snow sparkled beneath the early morning sun. In the distance, rugged mountains stood like silent guardians over the valley. Nearly an hour later, the ranch finally came into view. It wasn't the grand estate Eleanor had imagined from Samuel Whitaker's letters months earlier. Instead, it was something far better. A sturdy log house stood proudly beside a winding creek. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney while several horses grazed peacefully inside a fenced pasture. A large red barn stood nearby, surrounded by stacks of freshly cut firewood. Everything looked well cared for, not luxurious, just honest. Caleb helped Eleanor carry her suitcase inside. "This room belonged to my younger sister whenever she visited," he said, opening a small upstairs bedroom. "She married and moved east years ago." The room was simple. A wooden bed, a handmade quilt, a rocking chair beside the window, a bookshelf holding only a handful of worn novels. "It'll be more than enough," Eleanor smiled. "I'm glad." Without another word, Caleb quietly closed the door, allowing her privacy. That small act told her everything she needed to know about the man. He respected boundaries. He expected nothing. He simply offered kindness. The following weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. Every morning, Eleanor organized invoices, payroll records, cattle sales, supply orders, and ranch accounts that had piled up for years. Caleb had never neglected his responsibilities. He had simply been too busy doing every job himself. By noon, she usually joined Mrs. Miller, the elderly housekeeper, preparing lunch for the ranch hands. During the afternoon, she often watched Caleb working outside, whether repairing fences, training young horses, or helping an injured calf stand. He approached every task with remarkable patience. He never raised his voice, never complained, never asked anyone to do work he wouldn't do himself. Little by little, Eleanor found herself admiring him, not because he was handsome, although he certainly was, but because everything about him matched his character. Strong, dependable, quiet, honest. One cold evening, a fierce snowstorm swept across the valley. The wind howled against the windows while thick snow buried the ranch roads. Just after sunset, one of the ranch hands burst through the front door. "Mr. Lawson." Caleb immediately stood. "What happened?" The north fence collapsed. Half the cattle wandered toward the canyon. Without hesitation, Caleb grabbed his heavy coat. "I'm coming." Eleanor looked outside. "You can't go alone." "I have to. The storm is getting worse. If those cattle freeze tonight, half the ranch is gone." Within minutes, several ranch hands rode into the blizzard beside him. Eleanor waited by the window. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. The wind only grew stronger. She silently prayed for their safety. Finally, well after midnight, horses appeared through the swirling snow. Every animal had been recovered, but Caleb wasn't riding upright. 2 ranch hands were supporting him in the saddle. Eleanor rushed outside. "What happened?" "He slipped crossing frozen rocks," one cowboy answered. "He's lucky it wasn't worse." Caleb insisted he was fine. "I'm only bruised." But as he stepped from a horse, his knees nearly gave way. Eleanor caught his arm before he could fall. For the first time, the strong rancher allowed someone else to support him. Inside the house, she carefully cleaned the cuts on his hands before wrapping his injured shoulder. You should rest. I've got work tomorrow. She gave him a firm look. You'll still have work after breakfast. For a moment, Caleb looked surprised. Then he laughed. A quiet, genuine laugh. I suppose you're right. It was the first time Eleanor had ever heard him laugh. Somehow, it made the entire house feel warmer. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Snow melted into rushing streams. Wildflowers covered the hillsides. The ranch seemed alive again. One afternoon, Eleanor finished organizing every financial record dating back nearly 5 years. She proudly placed completed ledgers on Caleb's desk. I believe that's everything. He slowly flipped through the pages. Every receipt, every payment, every expense. Perfectly organized. He looked up. I don't know how to thank you. You already have. I have. You gave me another chance when I believed my life was over. Caleb looked away toward the open window. No, he spoke quietly. You earned this place. A few weeks later, trouble arrived unexpectedly. A wealthy businessman from Helena appeared with several lawyers. He claimed ownership of part of Caleb's grazing land. According to old records, the property boundaries had never been properly registered. Without proof, Caleb could lose hundreds of acres. For several evenings, the ranch office filled with maps, contracts, and faded documents. Eleanor searched through every old ledger she had organized. Finally, she found something. Hidden inside an old account book was an original land survey signed 20 years earlier by the county surveyor. The forgotten document proved Caleb's legal ownership. The businessman quietly withdrew his claim. After everyone left, Caleb remained standing in the office. If you hadn't found that paper, I was only doing my job. No, he smiled softly. You saved my ranch. Summer arrived. The ranch flourished. Cattle prices improved. New fences stretched across green pastures. The house felt different, too. There was laughter during supper. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table. Music occasionally drifted from the old piano Eleanor had restored. Without realizing it, neither of them felt lonely anymore. One Sunday evening, they walked beside the creek as the sun painted the mountains gold. Caleb finally broke the silence. When Mary died, Eleanor looked toward him. I thought my life had ended. He skipped a small stone across the water. I convinced myself the ranch was enough. He smiled sadly. It wasn't. She gently slipped her hand into his. Neither spoke. The quiet said everything. Several weeks later, the entire town gathered for Pine Ridge's annual harvest celebration. Children laughed. Musicians played cheerful fiddle tunes. Lanterns glowed beneath the evening sky. Mrs. Doyle smiled knowingly as she watched Caleb and Eleanor dancing together. I wondered how long it would take. The blacksmith chuckled. We all did. Even Caleb's ranch hands exchanged amused smiles. They had seen the truth long before the couple had. Late that evening, Caleb invited Eleanor onto the ranch porch. The valley lay silent beneath thousands of stars. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Caleb removed his hat. I've practiced this speech all week. She smiled. Then don't practice anymore. He laughed softly. Fair enough. He took one careful step closer. When you arrived in Pine Ridge, I believed I was giving a stranger a job. I know. I was wrong. She looked into his steady blue eyes. You gave this house life again. He swallowed. You gave me hope I thought I'd buried years ago. His voice grew quieter. I don't have fancy promises. I don't have great wealth. But I can promise honesty, loyalty, and a home where you'll never wonder whether someone is waiting for you. He reached into his pocket and revealed a simple silver ring that had belonged to his mother. Eleanor Hartley, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but gratitude. Months earlier, she had crossed the country, believing happiness waited inside someone else's promises. Instead, she had found it inside quiet acts of kindness. She smiled through happy tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb gently placed the ring on her finger before wrapping her in the warmest embrace she had ever known. Their wedding took place 6 weeks later inside Pine Ridge's little white church. Mrs. Doyle cried openly throughout the ceremony. The ranch hands stood proudly beside Caleb. The entire town celebrated long into the evening. No one spoke about tragedy anymore, only new beginnings. 5 years later, the ranch echoed with laughter. 2 little boys raced across the yard chasing chickens, while a tiny girl followed behind carrying wildflowers for her mother. Caleb leaned against the porch railing, smiling as Eleanor watched the children play. "Busy house," he said. She laughed. "You remember when you said it had 3 empty bedrooms?" "I do." "They're all full now." He slipped an arm around her shoulders. The evening sun dipped behind the mountains, bathing the valley in golden light. Years ago, Eleanor had traveled west believing her future had disappeared before it ever began. Looking around now, at her husband, her children, her home, she finally understood something beautiful. Sometimes God closes one door not to punish us, but to quietly lead us toward the home we were always meant to find.